The first thing I became aware of was the scent of my own perfume, a custom blend of night-blooming jasmine and vanilla that I had worn for years. It was so familiar, so intrinsically me, that for a moment I simply breathed it in, the fragrance anchoring me in a reality that felt both impossibly vivid and utterly wrong. My eyes fluttered open. I was seated at my gilded vanity, the one my father had commissioned from a craftsman in Paris. The cool, smooth surface of the mother-of-pearl inlay was beneath my fingertips. Marie, my lady's maid, was laying out an evening gown of sapphire blue silk on the bed behind me, the gown I was to wear to the Lawson Gala that night. A wave of disorientation so violent it was nauseating washed over me. This was my room. My old room in the Sterling mansion. But that was impossible. The last thing I remembered was the cold press of a steel table against my back, the clinical sting of a needle, and Julian Thorne's face, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical brand. I had died in that black site laboratory, my body and spirit broken by the man I had loved, the man my family had lifted from obscurity. My hands trembled as I picked up a silver-handled hairbrush. My reflection in the mirror was younger, the lines of worry and despair erased, replaced by the soft, unmarked face of a 22-year-old heiress who believed her future was a gilded path. Isabella Sterling. Belle. Before the fall. A knock at the door shattered my paralysis. My mother, no Clara, my stepmother, peeked in. Her face was a careful mask of neutral concern. Bella, darling, Julian is here. He's in the drawing room with your father. He says he's just returned from Milan and needs to speak with you urgently. Her tone was light, but I saw the faint worry in her eyes. Clara had always been perceptive, a trait my younger self, poisoned by Eleanor Thorne's whispers, had mistaken for cunning. My heart, the same heart that had given out in a cold lab, began to hammer against my ribs. 1. The business trip. The student. Oh, it can't be. This is a cruel dream, a final fever illusion before the end. But the brush in my hand was solid. The scent of jasmine was real. The dread coiling in my stomach was a live, electric thing. I stood on legs that felt foreign, my body moving on an autopilot I didn't recognize, and walked out of the room, down the grand staircase I had played on as a child, toward the drawing room. The scene was a perfect, horrifying recreation of a memory. My father, Alistair Sterling, stood by the fireplace, his expression one of paternal bemusement. Julian Thorne stood in the center of the room, his posture rigid, his handsome face a conflict of anguish and resolve. He was so young. The ruthless tycoon he would become was just a shadow in the set of his jaw. Bella, he said, and his voice was the same, that smooth, confident baritone that had once made my heart flutter and now sent a spike of pure terror through me. Julian, I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. You're back early. I need to speak with you. Alone. He glanced at my father, who nodded and gave me a reassuring smile before discreetly leaving the room. The door clicked shut, sealing me in with my nightmare. He didn't mince words. The script was exactly as I remembered. Bella, I'm sorry. I can't go through with this. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the back of a velvet armchair to steady myself. Can't go through with what, Julian? The merger? The meeting went poorly. We can. With us, he interrupted, his gaze finally meeting mine. There was no love there. Only a pained, selfish resolve. With the engagement, I met someone in Milan. Her name is Sophia Rossi. And he told me about the part-time design student, so sweet, so obedient, so real. How their connection was instant and profound. How he loved her. How he wanted to marry her. I listened, the words washing over me, each one a confirmation of the impossible truth. I was back. Back to the very moment my life had begun its irreversible spiral into hell. The memories of my previous life, the betrayal, the collapse, my father's broken body on the pavement, the endless humiliation, the cold experiments, flashed before my eyes with a clarity so intense it was physical pain. I saw Julian dragging me by my hair, throwing me to those men, his voice cold as he condemned me. For every moment of suffering Sophia endured because of you, you'll pay tenfold. A coldness settled over me, a glacial calm that shoved the panic and the pain into a locked box deep inside. This was no dream. This was a second chance. A chance to rewrite everything. I must have remained silent for too long because he shifted uncomfortably. Bella? Say something. What could I say? That I knew his so-called pure love for Sophia would curdle into something vile? That he would eventually sell her too for a business deal? That his mother was a viper and his ambition a black hole that would consume everyone around him? I said none of that. The Bella of this time would have been hysterical, pleading, raging. The Bella who had lived and died knew better. I see, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Thank you for your honesty, Julian. His eyes widened slightly. This was not the reaction he had prepared for. He expected tears, drama, a scene that would justify his narrative of me as the dramatic, burdensome socialite. My calm unnerved him. Before he could formulate a response, the drawing room doors burst open. Eleanor Thorne swept in, a vision of calculated outrage and faux concern. She was exactly as I remembered. Impeccably dressed, her face a masterpiece of subtle enhancements, her eyes sharp and missing nothing. Julian, how could you? She exclaimed, rushing to him first, playing the exasperated mother. Then she turned to me, her expression morphing into one of syrupy solidarity. Bella, my poor darling. Don't you listen to a word of this nonsense. It's just a silly infatuation. He doesn't know what he's saying. She enveloped me in a cloud of expensive perfume, and I had to fight the urge to recoil. This was the woman who had stood outside a door, listening to my screams as I was assaulted, and told the guards I was getting what I deserved. It's quite all right, Eleanor, I said, gently extricating myself from her grasp. It is not all right, she insisted, her voice hardening. This nobody cannot be allowed to disrupt our family's plans. We will handle this, Bella. You leave it to me. The best way to make a problem like her disappear is to send her somewhere she'll never be found. My contacts can have her on a plane to northern Myanmar by morning. All we need is your private jet. It's the only way for your own good. There was the same proposition, the same vile solution. In my first life, horrified and desperate to cling to him, I had agreed. I had signed the order that sent an innocent girl to hell, an act that Julian would never forgive me for, an act that would become the cornerstone of his justification for destroying me. I looked at her, at the greedy glint in her eyes she couldn't quite mask. This was never about my good. It was about securing the Thorne family's ascent on the back of the sterling fortune. Auntie, I said, my voice sharp enough to make her blink. I never said that. Saving a life is better than building a 7-tiered pagoda. I definitely never said those words. Her face fell, the mask slipping completely for a full second, revealing the cold, furious woman beneath. She recovered quickly. Bella, I'm doing this for you. A girl like Sophia can't stay. You're the real future daughter-in-law of the Thorne family. The irony was so thick I could taste it. For me. I let out a soft, incredulous laugh. Eleanor, we live in a modern society. If there's no love left, letting go is the only way. Clinging only hurts yourself. I saw the panic in her eyes. Her entire plan was evaporating. But, the merger, the family. Since Julian doesn't love me, I continued, my tone glacial, marrying him would only make him hate me. Why not let him be with this Sophia girl? Let them have their happy ending. Her face darkened, the carefully constructed facade of the gracious matron crumbling into something ugly and desperate. Bella Sterling, marriage is not a game. Exactly, I replied, tilting my head. It's not a game. And I have no interest in playing a losing hand with a partner who has already folded. I turned my back on her sputtering outrage and Julian's confused stare. I walked out of the drawing room, out of the mansion and into the cool evening air. A light drizzle began to fall, misting my hair and my gown. I didn't care. I tilted my face up to the sky, the water feeling like a baptism. I had done it. The first step was taken. I had not condemned Sophia Rossi. I had walked away from Julian Thorne. The future was a blank page, and for the first time since I had opened my eyes in this past, I felt a flicker of something other than dread. Felt like hope. The drizzle turned into a steady rain by the time the Sterling Town car pulled up to the curb. I hadn't called for it. My father, ever perceptive, must have seen me leave and sent it after me. James, our driver for 20 years, held the door open, his face a kind, neutral mask. Miss Sterling, he said softly. Home, James. Please. My voice sounded raw even to my own ears. The drive was a blur of wet streets and glowing lights. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, the events of the evening replaying in my mind on a frantic, dizzying loop. Julian's confession. Eleanor's proposition. My own cold, calculated responses. Each word I had spoken felt like a stone I was using to build a dam against the tidal wave of my past life. But the memories kept breaking through. The feel of Julian's hands on me, not in love but in hatred, dragging me. The sound of my father's body hitting the pavement. The sterile smell of the lab. Julian's voice, dripping with venom. You should have died. All of you Sterlings should have died. A sob caught in my throat and I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle it. James's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, filled with a quiet concern that nearly broke me. He had been there my whole life. He had driven me to my first day of school, to my debutante ball, to my wedding. And in my other life he had been let go without a reference when the Sterling estate was seized. I wondered what had happened to him. The car slid through the iron gates of our estate. The mansion was ablaze with light, a beacon of stability and old money that I now knew was terrifyingly fragile. The dam I was building inside me felt flimsy, made of twigs against the ocean of my grief. The car hadn't even come to a complete stop before the front door flew open. My father stood there, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, his tie loosened. His face was etched with a worry so deep it made my heart ache. Behind him, hovering anxiously, was Clara. I stumbled out of the car and in 2 strides he was there, pulling me into a hug so tight it crushed the breath from me. He was solid. He was warm. He was alive. Bella, he murmured into my hair, his voice rough with emotion. Oh, my darling girl. That was all it took. The dam shattered. The grief, the terror, the relief, the sheer overwhelming wrongness of it all erupted out of me in a torrent of heaving, uncontrollable sobs. I clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned to quicksand. I cried for the father I had lost, for the father who was holding me now, for the years of pain and the second chance I didn't understand. He didn't ask questions. He just held me, rocking me gently while I wept on the shoulder of his bespoke jacket. It's all right, Bella, he whispered. As long as it's your decision, we'll support it. Whatever it is. His unconditional support was a balm and a brand. He had said the same thing in my first life, when I had tearfully told him I'd agreed to Eleanor's plan. He had supported me then too, and it had led him to a rooftop and a fatal jump. The thought made me cry harder. Eventually my tears subsided into shaky hiccups. I pulled back, wiping my face with my hands, feeling like a child. Clara was there instantly, pressing a crisp, monogrammed handkerchief into my palm. Her eyes were red-rimmed. I heard you called off the engagement, she said, her voice awkward as it often was with me. We had never been close. Eleanor Thorne had seen to that, drip-feeding me poison about the gold-digging stepmother who wanted to replace my real mother. I had believed every word. I made all your favorite dishes. Coco vin. Chocolate soufflé. He was trying. In this life and in the last she had always tried. I thought of her in my past life, gathering what little she could salvage, fighting a hopeless battle against the Thorns, kneeling on courthouse steps with a bloody letter petition. I thought of her being run down in the street on Eleanor's orders, her body left unclaimed. The weight of my past mistreatment of her was a crushing guilt on top of everything else. I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't the villain I'd imagined. She was a woman who loved my father, who was trying to find her place in a ready-made family, who was facing a sobbing stepdaughter with a helpless, genuine concern. I didn't think. I just stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. She froze, utterly stunned. We didn't hug. Our relationship had been a long, cold war of politeness and veiled insults. Mom, I whispered, the word feeling foreign and right on my tongue. It was all my fault before. I was too selfish. For a moment she was rigid. Then with a choked sound her arms came around me, holding me tightly. She began to cry, soft, shaky tears of her own. Oh, my sweet Bella, she murmured into my hair. You've been through so much. It was a seismic shift. The ice that had existed between us for a decade cracked and melted in that single embrace. My father watched us, his own eyes suspiciously bright, a look of profound relief on his face. Later, after I had changed into dry clothes and picked at the meal Clara had insisted on serving me, the 3 of us sat in my father's study. The room smelled of old leather, fine whiskey and cedar, the scent of my childhood, of safety. I knew I had to tell them everything. Not the truth of my rebirth, they would think me insane, but a version of it they could believe. I stood before them, clutching my hands together. Dad, Mom, I began, the new title for Clara feeling more natural. Please, you have to believe what I'm about to tell you. You must stop all business cooperation with the Thorne family. Immediately. My father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. Bella, what's brought this on? Julian's indiscretion is one thing, but our business interests are intertwined. They're not an indiscretion. I insisted, my voice trembling with the urgency of my knowledge. It's a pattern. It's who they are. I overheard things at their house today after you left. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. They seem gentle and kind, but it's a facade. They're ruthless, power-hungry, and they're secretly plotting to steal everything from us. They're manipulative. And Julian, he's the worst of all. He's disloyal, emotionally unstable, and selfish beyond belief. He's already betrayed me, and he'll think nothing of betraying us. A family like theirs is not worthy of being tied to ours. That's the real reason I broke it off. The words poured out of me, fueled by the terrifying truth of my memories. I spoke of their ambition, their resentment of our old money status, their desire to not just join our world but to conquer it and supplant us. When I finished, I was breathless. Claire was the first to speak. She came over and gently patted my hand. Our Bella's grown up, she said softly, looking at my father. I've said it before. The Thornes are unreliable. If it weren't for you liking that boy, we never would have dealt with them. The simple truth of her statement hit me like a physical blow. It was all my fault. Every bit of support, every lucrative deal handed to them, every door opened, it was all because of me. My childish infatuation had been the key they used to unlock the sterling vaults. The guilt was a sickening weight in my stomach. I dropped to my knees in front of them, fresh tears welling in my eyes. Dad, Mom, it was all my fault. I've been foolish, judging people by appearances. I was blind. From now on, I'll never be that reckless again. I'll fight for our family. I'll make sure the Sterlings rise again, and that we're never so vulnerable again. My father's face was a storm of emotions. Concern, anger at the Thornes, and overwhelming pride in me. He pulled me up and into another hug. Oh, Chloe, he said, using his childhood nickname for me. You are not to blame for the avarice of others. But your eyes are open now. That's what matters. He held me at arm's length, his hands on my shoulders. Consider it done. We'll begin untangling ourselves from the Thornes first thing tomorrow. The relief that washed over me was so profound my knees nearly buckled. The first, most crucial step was taken. I had secured my family. The fortress walls were going back up. Julian and Eleanor Thorne would not get their hands on my legacy again. I had survived the unraveling. Now it was time to rebuild. The morning after the world ended and began again, I awoke with a start, my heart pounding, expecting to see the cold, sterile ceiling of the lab. Instead, I saw the familiar, delicate pattern of the silk canopy above my four-poster bed. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The world was quiet, save for the distant sound of a gardener trimming the hedges. It was real. It was all real. The crushing weight of my memories was still there, a dark ocean beneath a fragile calm, but the paralyzing terror had receded. It had been replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I had a purpose now: protect the Sterlings, ensure the Thornes' downfall, and live a life that was truly my own. The first part of that plan involved absolute, unwavering distance from Julian and Eleanor. The second part involved managing the social fallout. In our world, a broken engagement was not a private affair. It was a public transaction, and its dissolution had to be handled with precision. My father, true to his word, had already begun the complex process of severing business ties. It would take time, but the message had been sent. Sterling support was withdrawn. I knew the Thornes would not take this lying down. Eleanor's entire life's work had been dedicated to climbing into our echelon of society. She would fight dirty. I expected a private charm offensive, desperate phone calls, perhaps even a tearful visit. What I did not expect was the sheer, unmitigated gall of Julian Thorne. It happened at the Winthrops' annual charity gala, the social event of the season. Attendance was mandatory for anyone who was anyone. My parents and I had debated not going, but hiding would be seen as weakness, as shame. We had to go heads high and show the world that the Sterlings were unfazed. I wore a simple, stunning gown of emerald green that Clara had helped me choose. It was elegant and confident, a far cry from the frilly feminine styles Julian had always said he preferred. As we entered the glittering ballroom, a hush fell for a fraction of a second before the usual din resumed, now laced with a new, frantic energy. I could feel the eyes on us, hear the whispers behind fans and champagne flutes. We smiled, we greeted acquaintances, we played our part. I was holding a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking when I saw him. Julian was across the room, his face pale and set. He looked like a man heading to the gallows, which in a social sense he was. And then he did it. He broke away from his parents. Eleanor's face was a rigid mask of horror, and strode purposefully to the center of the dance floor. He didn't look at me. He looked at our parents. The string quartet trailed off. Conversations died. Every head turned. He dropped to one knee. A gasp rippled through the crowd. For a heart-stopping second I thought he was going to propose to me again, a grotesque public attempt to force a reconciliation. But his words were worse. So much worse. "Dad, Mom," he said, his voice ringing out in the stunned silence. He included my parents in his address, a familiarity that now felt obscene. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. Please. In front of everyone here today, I'm begging you." He was playing the tortured romantic, the man forced to choose between duty and love. "Let me be with Sophia. Bella and I have no love left between us. Everything was my fault. Please, Mr. Sterling. I beg you to let us go." The silence was absolute. I stood frozen, not with heartbreak but with a white-hot rage that threatened to incinerate me on the spot. He was humiliating me. He was humiliating my family. He was painting himself as the noble hero bravely defying the cruel, unfeeling establishment for his true love, and casting me and my parents as the villains standing in the way of his happiness. He was making our private pain a public spectacle to salvage his own pride. I saw his father, Charles Thorne, go ashen with fury. I saw Eleanor close her eyes in utter mortification. They knew. They knew this social suicide would destroy any remaining chance they had. But it was my father who reacted. Alistair Sterling stepped forward, and the air in the room seemed to chill by 10 degrees. His face, usually warm and jovial, was carved from stone. "You ungrateful brat," Charles Thorne roared, finding his voice, but my father held up a hand, silencing him. His gaze was fixed on Julian, who was still kneeling, now looking less sure of himself. My father's voice when he spoke was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the room, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "Young man," he said, each word dripping with contempt. "Since the day you met my daughter, has the Sterling family ever treated yours unfairly? Has Bella ever done anything but help you? Has our support ever been conditional?" Julian opened his mouth but no sound came out. The eyes of the entire elite of the city were upon him and he had no answer. "If you wish to break the engagement," my father continued, the temperature dropping further, "then let us make it official. Right here. Right now." He turned his gaze to include Charles and Eleanor. "From this day forward, the Sterlings and the Thornes have nothing to do with each other. All engagement gifts will be returned. Our business dealings are concluded. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, for your partnership. It is now at an end." It was a verbal execution. Polite, precise, and utterly final. The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. My father had not just accepted the broken engagement. He had publicly and irrevocably exiled the Thorne family from our circle. Without Sterling backing, they were nothing. They were pariahs. The Thornes were ruined. But the circus wasn't over. As if on cue, a young woman appeared at the edge of the crowd, drawn by the commotion. Sophia Rossi. She looked small and frightened in a simple dress that marked her as an outsider. Eleanor, in a fit of rage and humiliation, snatched a full glass of red wine from a passing waiter and hurled it. "You little seductress." Julian leaped up, placing himself in the path of the glass. It shattered against his chest, staining his white shirt like blood. He turned to Sophia, pulling her into a protective embrace. "It's okay, Lily. I'm here." He'd even used the wrong name in his dramatic fervor. Eleanor, still trying to salvage something, turned to me, her voice pleading. "Bella, Auntie will stand up for you. You are and will always be the rightful daughter-in-law of the Thorne family." I let out a cold, clear laugh that cut through the tension. "Don't waste your breath, Eleanor. We've said everything that needs to be said today." I looked at Julian, clutching his weeping girlfriend, both of them standing in a puddle of wine and shattered crystal. They looked like children playing at tragedy. I turned my back on them, linking my arm through my father's. Together with Clara on my other side, we walked out of the ballroom. We didn't hurry. We didn't look back. We let the silence and the stares of the crowd follow us out. The message had been sent, not with a whisper but with a thunderclap. The Sterlings were done with the Thorns. As our car pulled away, I looked out the window. I saw Mason Croft, my childhood friend and neighbor, standing under the portico watching me leave. He wasn't smiling. He just gave me a slow, deliberate nod of respect. The gambit was over. We had won the first very public battle. The war, I knew, was just beginning. In the days following the gala, our world became a whirlwind of quiet activity and deafening gossip. The story of Julian's public kneel and plea and my father's icy rebuke was the only topic of conversation in our social stratum. The Thorns were radioactive. Invitations to their events were rescinded. Their stock price predictably began a steady, sickening decline. I, meanwhile, became a reluctant object of fascination. I was no longer just Isabella Sterling, the heiress. I was Isabella Sterling, the woman who had coldly dismissed the upstart Thorn family. Whispers followed me, but they were now tinged with a new respect, even a little fear. I found I didn't mind it. My father and Clara were a fortress of support. The process of untangling our businesses from the Thorns was complex and costly, but Alistair Sterling pursued it with a ruthless efficiency I hadn't known he possessed. It was a side of him he'd never had to show me before. I was fiercely proud of him. But I knew I couldn't just hide behind my family's walls. Julian's betrayal and my brutal rebirth had ignited a new need in me: competence. I was the sole heir to a vast empire, and in my first life, I had been content to be a decorative figure, to hand over the reins to a husband I thought was capable. I would never make that mistake again. I needed to learn. I needed to become someone who could not only inherit the Sterling legacy but defend it and build upon it. That meant leaving. I announced my decision over breakfast. I'm going back to school. For my MBA. In the UK. Clara dropped her spoon. The UK? But darling, you could go anywhere here. Harvard, Stanford. I need to be away from here, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Away from the gossip. Away from everything. I didn't add away from the ghost of my past life that haunts every corner of this city. My father studied me over the rim of his coffee cup. He saw the determination in my eyes, the new hardness that had replaced my former naivete. He nodded slowly. If that's what you want, Bella, we'll make it happen. The first step in my new life was to tidy up the loose ends of my old one. That meant mending fences I had burned in my blind devotion to Julian. There was one fence in particular that needed urgent attention: Mason Croft. The Crofts were our neighbors and, like us, a family whose wealth was measured in generations, not decades. Mason and I had grown up together, childhood allies who had drifted apart in our teens as I became infatuated with Julian and he had become Mason. Sharp, sarcastic, brilliant, and utterly intolerant of fools. He had seen through Julian Thorn immediately and had never hesitated to say so, which had led to a massive friendship-ending fight between us. I found out from a mutual friend that he was at a private club downtown, celebrating a successful acquisition with his friends. Gathering my courage, I went, a bottle of his favorite scotch as a peace offering. The scene inside the private room was one of relaxed, masculine bonhomie. Mason held court in an armchair, looking infuriatingly handsome and at ease. When I walked in, the conversation died instantly. All eyes turned to me. Well, drawled Shane Lynn, Mason's best friend. What brings the elegant Miss Sterling to a den of idle slackers like us? Mason looked up, his expression unreadable. Miss Sterling, he said, his tone neutral. To what do we owe the honor? I walked over, placed the bottle of scotch on the table in front of him, and looked him directly in the eye. Mason, you were right before, I said, my voice clear and steady. Julian Thorn really is a social climbing bastard who should never be trusted. I was wrong to defend him. I was wrong to end our friendship over him. I'm sorry. The silence in the room was profound. Shane's jaw was practically on the floor. Mason just stared at me, his blue eyes searching mine for a long moment. I saw surprise, skepticism, and then finally a glimmer of genuine warmth. Are you serious? He asked quietly. I nodded. Deadly. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it from handsome to devastating. You have no idea how much it hurt to watch you make that mistake, he said, his voice losing its edge. But admitting you're wrong and changing your ways? That's growth. That's admirable. He picked up the bottle. Let's all raise a glass to Bella for finally ditching that jerk. The tension broke. Glasses were raised. I was welcomed back into the fold with laughter and toasts. It felt like coming home. But the moment was shattered by the door slamming open. Sophia Rossi stood there, her face flushed with anger. She must have followed me. Bella, you can't just slander Julian like that, she cried, her voice trembling. The room went quiet again. Mason didn't even bother to stand. He gave her a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. And who exactly are you? He asked flatly. You do realize it's the 21st century, right? If you're so obsessed with whatever era you think you're living in, feel free to go back there. Just don't come in here ranting like a fool. His friends laughed. Sophia flinched, her courage evaporating under the weight of their collective scorn. Just then Julian burst in, drawn by the commotion. He rushed to shield Sophia, glaring at me with naked hatred. Bella, if I see you bullying Sophia again, don't blame me for what I'll do next, he snarled. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. I crossed my arms. Go ahead. Show me. I'd love to see what you'll do. The contrast was stark. Here was Julian, emotional, threatening, his world shrinking to a point of petty vengeance. And here was I, calm, surrounded by powerful allies, my future expanding before me. He had nothing left to threaten me with. He was a king who had set his own castle on fire. Humiliated, he grabbed Sophia's arm and stormed out. Mason looked at me, a curious glint in his eye. Happy now? Of course, I replied, and I meant it. A guy like that. He's not even qualified to shine my shoes. Mason raised his glass again. To Isabella Sterling. Welcome back to the land of common sense. I clinked my glass with his, feeling a sense of rightness I hadn't felt in years. One bridge had been rebuilt. I was ready to cross it and never look back. The Croft family's anniversary party was the last major social event before my departure for the UK. It was held at their stunning mountain resort estate, a sprawling compound of glass and timber that seemed to grow out of the landscape. It was beautiful, exclusive, and the perfect hunting ground for a predator like Eleanor Thorne. I knew she wouldn't let me go without a fight. The Thornes were circling the drain. Their business was failing, their social standing was ash, and their prized heir was being sidelined by Charles's illegitimate children, who were now circling like vultures. I was their last, desperate hope for a lifeline, and Eleanor was capable of anything. I wore a gown of liquid gold that evening, a color that spoke of confidence and value. I felt strong, surrounded by friends who had welcomed me back. Mason was a constant, warm presence at my side, introducing me to associates, making sure my glass was always full of sparkling water instead of champagne. He'd been oddly attentive since our reconciliation, his usual lazy roguishness replaced by a protective watchfulness. We were laughing with a group of friends out on the terrace under the stars, the music a soft hum in the background. I was describing my plans for London, feeling invincible, when a server offered me a fresh flute of champagne from a specific tray. I absent-mindedly reached for it. A hand shot out, grabbing my wrist before I could touch the glass. I turned, startled. Lily Green stood there, her face pale and desperate. She looked different. The timid, anxious girl was gone, replaced by someone with a fierce, determined light in her eyes. "Don't," she whispered urgently. Before I could react, she grabbed the flute from the server's tray and poured it onto the stone floor. The pale liquid fizzed against the flagstones. "Lily, what the hell are you doing?" I snapped, my old annoyance flaring. Why was she always here? "You can't drink that," she said, her voice low but intense. She looked from me to Mason, her expression deadly serious. "Eleanor Thorne drugged your wine. She wants you and Julian to spend the night together. Then she'll bring reporters to your room in the morning and pressure you into marrying him. She wants to trap you." The world narrowed to her face. I saw it then, the same certainty I felt in my own soul. The knowledge of things that hadn't happened yet. The ghost of shared suffering. She wasn't the timid Sophia Rossi of this timeline. She was the Lily Green who had been sold and discarded by Julian Thorne in another life. She had been reborn too. The pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. Her strange protectiveness. Her desperate attempts to steer Julian away from me. She wasn't trying to steal him, she was trying to save us both. I understand, I said quietly, my anger evaporating. Go. No. I won't fall into her trap. She hesitated, then nodded, melting back into the crowd. I turned to Mason, whose face was tight with concern. Chloe, you only had a sip days ago. Are you feeling okay? That's when I felt it. A strange, creeping heat was blooming low in my stomach, spreading through my veins like wildfire. It was a familiar, terrifying sensation from my past life. A potent cocktail of aphrodisiacs and relaxants Eleanor had sometimes used to subdue problematic individuals. Honestly, I gasped, my hand going to my throat. Something's wrong. The heat intensified, a throbbing, insistent need that made my skin feel too tight. My breath hitched. The slightest glance at any man, at Mason, sent a jolt of raw, unwanted desire through me. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, using the pain to anchor myself. I would not lose control. Not here. This is too much, I panted. Get me to a hospital. Now. Mason didn't ask questions. He wrapped a firm arm around my waist, supporting me as we quickly and discreetly exited through a side door. The cool night air did nothing to douse the fire inside me. His car was nearby. He helped me into the passenger seat, his touch sending another wave of agony and pleasure through my system. I was drenched in a cold sweat, trembling uncontrollably. Mason, how long until we get there? I bit out, my teeth chattering. I feel like I'm melting. Hang in there, Chloe. We've only been driving for 5 minutes. I've already found the nearest hospital, he said, his voice tense as he floored the accelerator. The car sped through the dark, winding mountain roads. But it was no use. The drug was too fast, too powerful. My body was betraying me, arching toward him of its own volition. I clawed at the neckline of my gown, fidgeting, burning up from the inside. It was unbearable, a exquisite torture. Mason, is there a hotel nearby? I begged, my voice shaking with shame and need. I can't take this anymore. I don't care who. I'll pay him later. Just pull over. Hearing that, Mason swore under his breath. He whipped the car into a hard, screeching 180-degree turn. Hold on 2 more minutes, he said, his jaw clenched. My villa is nearby. True to his word, we pulled up to a modern, secluded villa in under 2 minutes. He rushed to open my door. I practically fell into his arms. The feel of his solid body against mine was the final straw. My control shattered. You don't need some random guy, he murmured, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. He was looking down at me, his face a mask of concern and something else. Something darker. I'm right here. Well, I do. It wasn't a question of want. It was a question of survival. I knew Mason. He was proud, decent. At worst, I could make it up to him later. At that moment, he was the only anchor in a storm of chemical madness. I didn't answer with words. I lunged for him, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling his mouth down to mine. The dam broke. The next few hours were a blur of heat, skin, and desperate urgency. The drug stripped away every pretense, every inhibition, leaving only raw, primal need. Mason was neither gentle nor rough. He was simply there, a solid, responsive presence meeting my fire with his own controlled burn, keeping me from flying apart entirely. When I finally surfaced back into awareness, it was the deep, quiet hour before dawn. I was tangled in the sheets of a large bed, Mason's arm a heavy, warm weight across my waist. The effects of the drug had faded, leaving behind a profound physical exhaustion and a deep, cringing embarrassment. I carefully extricated myself, my body aching in unfamiliar ways. I found my ruined gown on the floor and located a robe in his closet, wrapping it tightly around myself. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the first hints of pink tinge the sky over the mountains. What had I done? Mason Croft was my oldest friend. I had just used him to scratch a chemical itch. I had complicated everything on the eve of my departure. I felt him stir behind me. Chloe? His voice was sleep-roughened. I didn't turn around. I'm so sorry, Mason, I whispered, my voice thick with shame. I heard the bed creak as he sat up. Don't be, he said, his tone quiet but firm. You have nothing to be sorry for. Eleanor Thorne does. I'm just glad I was there. His absolution should have made me feel better. It only made me feel worse. He was being noble and I felt like I had taken advantage of that nobility. I need to go home, I said, finally turning to face him. I need to pack. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Okay, he said simply. I'll drive you. The poison was out of my system. But the aftermath, I feared, was just beginning. The ride back to the Sterling estate was shrouded in a thick, awkward silence. Mason didn't try to fill it with empty chatter, for which I was grateful. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of embarrassment, residual anger at Eleanor, and a nagging anxiety about the future. I had wanted to leave for the UK with a clean slate, with my friendships repaired and my path clear. Now I had introduced a massive complicating variable. Mason, to his credit, acted as if nothing had changed. He helped me finalize my packing, double-checked my travel documents, and insisted on driving me to the airport himself. His calm, practical demeanor was a balm, even as it confused me further. The airport was a bubble of controlled chaos. We sat in the hushed, luxurious confines of the Sterling private lounge, sipping coffee. The silence between us now was less awkward, more pensive. I could feel him watching me, a question hovering in the air. Finally he set his cup down. Chloe, he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. Can you be my girlfriend? I paused, my own cup halfway to my lips. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was serious. There was no trace of his usual teasing smirk. Is this just because we slept together once? I asked gently, needing to be sure. No, he replied, his gaze steady and sincere. I've liked you for a long time. My heart ached. I appreciated his honesty more than I could say. In another life, another version of me, I might have said yes. Mason Croft was everything one could want. Intelligent, kind, handsome, from a good family. But the woman sitting across from him was not that girl. I was a collection of fractured memories and hardened instincts. I was damaged goods, and my only goal was to piece myself and my family's legacy back together. I had no room for romance. I couldn't trust it, couldn't trust my own judgment where it was concerned. Mason, I said, my voice soft but firm. Thank you for helping me that night. If it weren't for you, I might not have made it. But I'm just not in the mood for a relationship right now. I meant it sincerely. I saw the flicker of disappointment in his eyes, but he covered it quickly with a sheepish smile. It's okay, Chloe. Being friends is great too. I'm not going to guilt trip you just because something happened between us. His grace made me feel even worse. He was letting me off the hook so easily. He quickly changed the subject, asking about my course schedule, my apartment in London, falling back into the easy rhythm of our long friendship. Just as I began to relax, I heard a frantic voice calling my name from the entrance to the lounge. Chloe. Chloe, please. It was Lily. She was being held back by a lounge attendant, her face pale and streaked with tears, her eyes wide with panic. She had a backpack slung over her shoulder, a ticket clutched in her hand, a coach ticket to France. My conversation with Mason forgotten, I hurried over and got permission for her to come inside. She rushed in, collapsing into a chair opposite us, her body shaking with sobs. Thank you, Chloe, she gasped, her eyes already red and swollen. What's wrong? I asked, my tone neutral but not unkind. We weren't friends, but we were bound by a secret no one else in the world could understand. Chloe, please help me, she sobbed, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. Julian, he's disgusting. His business partners are pulling away from him, and now he wants to hand me over to one of them to secure a deal. I heard him and his mother talking about it last night. The story spilled out of her. The Thorne family's desperation. The partner who had taken a liking to her. Their decision to send her to his bed as a bargaining chip. She'd bought a ticket and run, knowing the Thornes would be looking for her at the airport. She'd hoped to lose herself in the crowd and get on my flight. You're trying to leave with me? I asked, though I'd already guessed it. Yes, she said urgently. They know I ran. They're at the airport looking for me now. Please, Chloe. I don't want to be treated like some object, some gift they're throwing onto a man's bed. Her voice trembled with a genuine bone-deep fear I recognized all too well. He was me. She was the pawn in their game, and the game had turned deadly. I made her sit down. Now you understand who Julian really is, don't you? He'll marry for profit and sell the woman he loves for profit too. Mason, silent until now, went to get her a coffee. I turned my attention back to her. You're planning to stay abroad for a long time, right? What kind of visa do you have? I've already got everything sorted. I can stay long term, she said, but she was nervous, evasive. She just needed to get on that plane. What country are you going to? Maybe we're headed in the same direction. I'm going to France, she said. I'm studying fashion design. In her mind, it didn't matter where I was going. She just needed to get on the same plane. I'm headed to the UK, I replied. But I was thinking about stopping in France for a few days first. Let's go together. As we were talking, Mason returned, his expression grim. You two need to hide in the restroom. No. The Thorns are heading this way looking for someone. The fear on Lily's face was primal. Without a word, we grabbed her single backpack and slipped into the large, accessible restroom in the lounge, locking the door behind us. We stood in silence, listening to the sounds of the airport beyond the door. Minutes later we heard them. Julian's voice, sharp with anger. Eleanor's, shrill and demanding. They were arguing with the lounge attendants, demanding to be let in to look for someone. My heart hammered against my ribs. But the sterling name held weight. The attendants held firm. After a few tense minutes, we heard their frustrated voices fading away. It wasn't until we were safely in the air, the coastline receding beneath us, that I finally exhaled a sigh of relief. Lily, seated next to me, had finally stopped trembling. On the flight she told me her story. Her real story. After I married Julian in our previous life, she had gone to France to study. Once I was discarded and everything had settled, Julian brought her back. But his ambition led him to organized crime. A powerful gangster took an interest in her and Julian, without a second thought, handed her over. She died at their hands. We were two sides of the same cursed coin. Both used, both discarded, both reborn. We stayed in Paris for a few days. Lily went to the design studio she had contacted. I wandered the city, a ghost among the living, trying to find my footing in this new old world. Mason inexplicably stayed with us, a silent, watchful shadow. Every time I asked him when he was heading back, he'd just say, "I'll go once I'm sure you're safe in the UK." We arrived in London together. Mason helped me register for classes and settle into the elegant apartment my father had bought for me near campus. He stayed for a month, a platonic presence helping me navigate the city, never overstepping, never mentioning the night at the villa or his proposal. He was just there. A steady, reliable friend. The day he finally left, I went to Heathrow to see him off. The goodbyes were said, the promises to call made. Just before he turned to enter the security line, I called out to him. "Mason, before your flight, I have something to show you." I handed him a small, folded piece of paper from my purse. He opened it, his brow furrowed. It was the results of a prenatal blood test. The one that had confirmed what my own body had already told me. His eyes scanned the words. I watched his face, my heart in my throat. I saw the confusion, then the dawning comprehension, then the stunned, overwhelming joy. Tears welled in his eyes. "Chloe," he breathed, looking from the paper to my face. "Let's get married." Seriously. I looked back at him, my own emotions a tangled knot. "I'm keeping the baby," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But I'm not going to use this child to tie you down. You can be his father or not. That's your choice." He stared at me for a long moment, the joy in his eyes tempered by understanding. "Chloe, I get what you're saying," he said softly. "You've always been a free spirit. That's okay. I'll come visit you often. Whatever you need, just tell me." He wasn't angry. He wasn't demanding. He was just happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy about the baby. I had a live-in housekeeper arranged. I would take a short break from classes when the time came and return after the baby was born. I had it all planned. I would not be derailed. "You don't have to hold yourself back for me," I added, wanting to be perfectly clear. "Live your life. Fall in love if you want to." He gave me a sad, sweet smile that I didn't quite understand. "Chloe, do you really think I've been single all these years for no reason?" Before I could process that, the final boarding call for his flight echoed through the terminal. "All right, go on," I said, waving him away. I watched until his figure disappeared from sight, my hand resting unconsciously on my still flat stomach. My path, which I had thought was so clear, had just taken another unexpected turn. I was alone in a new country, pregnant, with a future more uncertain than ever. And yet, for the first time, the life growing inside me felt less like a complication and more like a promise. A new beginning, utterly and completely my own. London was a palette of grey stone and damp air, a world away from the sun-drenched, gossip-fueled landscape of my old life. It was exactly what I needed. The anonymity was a gift. Here I wasn't Isabella Sterling, the jilted heiress. I was just another student, another face in the crowd, another expectant mother navigating the bustling streets of Kensington. My life settled into a new, rigorous rhythm. Mornings were for lectures on economics and international business law. My focus was absolute. I devoured the material not as a passive heir but as a future CEO. Every concept, every case study, was filed away as a potential weapon or shield for protecting the Sterling legacy. Afternoons were spent in the library or in my apartment, surrounded by textbooks and legal pads, my stomach slowly but surely beginning to swell. Mrs. Abbott, the stern but kind housekeeper my father had insisted upon, became my guardian angel. She managed the apartment, ensured I ate nutritious meals, and became a silent, comforting presence. I found myself talking to her about my studies, my fears for the future, and she would listen with a quiet wisdom that reminded me of Clara. Mason was true to his word. He called every other day, his voice a familiar, grounding presence across the miles. He never pressured me, never brought up his proposal. He asked about my classes, the baby, sent me ridiculous articles from home, and told me amusing stories about the social scene I had left behind. His visits were monthly events he meticulously planned around his own work schedule. He would arrive laden with gifts, books he thought I'd like, strange cravings I'd mentioned, tiny, impossibly soft baby clothes. His presence was different during those visits. The lazy rogue was gone, replaced by a man who was thoughtful, attentive, and fiercely protective in a way that was never smothering. He'd accompany me to prenatal appointments, his large hand engulfing mine, asking the doctor intelligent questions I hadn't even thought of. We'd walk through Hyde Park talking for hours about everything and nothing. It was during these visits that the awkwardness from the night of the party finally melted away, replaced by a deep, abiding friendship that felt like the strongest foundation I'd ever known. I heard snippets of news from home filtered through Mason and my parents. The Thorns' decline was swift and brutal. Without the Sterling alliance, their business floundered. Charles Thorn, in a desperate bid to save his company, began pushing Julian aside, promoting his more pragmatic, illegitimate children. Julian, arrogant to the end, believed his position was unassailable. He was wrong. The gossip was that he'd become entangled with a dangerous crowd, a circle of older, wealthy women and black market dealers. He was their handsome trophy, their amusement. The word was that he'd tried to steal from one of them and had disappeared shortly after. The whispers said Myanmar. I didn't know if it was true, and I found I didn't care. He was a ghost from another life. Eleanor's fate was equally grim. Charles had finally divorced her, tossing her out of the house after she attacked one of his mistresses. The last anyone heard, she was living in a modest apartment on a dwindling allowance, her name a laughingstock in the very circles she had fought so hard to enter. Their downfall brought me no joy, only a quiet, solid sense of closure. The threat was gone. The battlefield was quiet. My life was now measured in trimesters and semesters. I took my exams in my second trimester, scoring at the top of my class. As my due date approached, I officially deferred my studies. My father and Clara flew over, filling my apartment with their nervous, excited energy. Clara fussed over nursery colors, and my father, the titan of industry, was reduced to a nervous wreck at the thought of his daughter giving birth. The day my son decided to enter the world was a blur of controlled chaos and profound primal pain. Mrs. Abbott called the car. Mason, who had flown in a week early just in case, held my hand all the way to the private hospital, his face pale but determined. My parents followed in another car. And then, after what felt like an eternity of struggle, there was a new sound in the world. A strong, indignant cry. They placed him on my chest, a tiny, red, perfect human being with a shock of dark hair and Mason's startlingly blue eyes. In that moment, every hardship, every moment of pain and fear from my past and present, melted away. He was real. He was mine. I named him Alexander after my father, but from the start he was my little Xander. Mason wept. Openly, unashamedly, tears of joy streaming down his face as he cut the cord. He looked at me, at Xander, with a love so raw and overwhelming it stole my breath away. The months that followed were an exhausting, beautiful haze of late-night feedings, first smiles, and the overwhelming, terrifying love of motherhood. Xander became my sun, my moon, my entire universe. My parents extended their stay, becoming doting grandparents. Mason's visits became more frequent, longer. He was a natural father, changing diapers with a comical seriousness, walking Xander for hours when he was fussy, his large frame making my son look even smaller in his arms. I watched them together, my heart doing a strange, aching flip every time. The wall I had built so carefully around my heart, the one that said no romance, no entanglements, just you and your son, began to develop cracks. I finished my degree when Xander was a year old. My graduation ceremony was held in a grand ancient hall. I wore my cap and gown, my heart swelling with pride not just for myself but for the journey. I had done it. Alone but not alone. And then I saw them. In the audience, surrounded by other families, sat Mason. Anne on his lap, wearing a tiny little suit and clapping his chubby hands with glee, was Xander. They were both watching me, their identical blue eyes full of pride. Something broke open inside me then, standing on that stage. The final piece of my damaged heart slid back into place. Love wasn't a weakness. It wasn't a trap. It was this. It was Mason, who had never asked for anything but had given me everything. It was Xander, who was my future. It was my family, who had stood by me through everything. After the ceremony, we strolled through a park near my apartment, Xander toddling between us, clutching our fingers. The sun was warm on our faces. It was a perfect moment, suspended in time. Mason stopped walking and knelt not to me but to Xander. He whispered something in his ear. My son, my brilliant, beautiful boy, giggled and reached into the pocket of his tiny jacket. He pulled out a small velvet box and, with a solemnity that belied his age, handed it to me. My breath caught. I looked from Xander's proud, smiling face to Mason's. He was still on one knee, looking up at me, his expression vulnerable, hopeful, and filled with a love that had been there all along. Chloe, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've loved you since we were kids. I loved you when you were blind, and I loved you when you could see. I love our son more than life itself. I don't want to just be his father who visits. I want to be your husband. I want to be your partner. Every day. Always. I looked down at the ring, then at Xander, who was now hugging Mason's knee, beaming. I thought of the long, lonely road I had traveled, of the darkness I had survived, of the second chance I had been given. I thought of the man kneeling before me who had been my constant, my anchor, my friend through all of it. I didn't know what the future would bring. But I knew who I wanted by my side for it. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Yes, I said, my voice thick with happy tears. Yes, Mason Croft. I will marry you. He surged to his feet, pulling me and Xander into a crushing hug. We stood there, the three of us, a family wrapped in the golden London light. The past was finally, truly behind us. The word yes seemed to hang in the London air, a tangible, shimmering thing that changed everything. Mason's arms tightened around me and Xander, and I felt the tremble that ran through his frame, a release of years of pent-up hope. Xander, squished between us, giggled, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that sealed the moment in perfection. We didn't have a grand, dramatic wedding. The memory of my first engagement, with its spectacle and eventual public implosion, had soured me on large productions. Instead, we married quietly 6 months later in the gardens of my parents' estate. It was a small gathering of only our closest family and friends. Clara cried happy tears throughout the entire ceremony. My father gave me away with a look of profound peace on his face, finally able to pass the care of his daughter to a man he respected and trusted implicitly. Xander, now a sturdy toddler, served as the ring-bearer, marching down the aisle with fierce concentration, clutching the pillow as if it were the crown jewels. When Mason slipped the simple platinum band onto my finger, it felt nothing like the heavy, ostentatious diamond Julian had given me. This ring was a promise, not a possession. It was light. It was right. We moved into a beautiful modern home not far from my father's estate, a place with a big garden for Xander to run in and plenty of space for us to grow. Mason seamlessly integrated his business operations with the Sterling Empire, not as a takeover but as a true merger. He was brilliant, innovative, and had a ruthless strategic mind that complemented my father's experience and my own newly honed acumen. Together, the three of us became an unstoppable force. The Sterling Croft name became synonymous not just with old money, but with sharp, ethical, and forward-thinking enterprise. I thought often of the woman I had been, the naive heiress who believed love was a fairy tale and her future was to be a beautiful accessory on a powerful man's arm. That woman had died in a lab. The woman who replaced her was a partner, a mother, a CEO in training. I found I had a knack for business, a cold-eyed assessment of risk and reward that must have been forged in the fires of my past suffering. I was no longer afraid of the boardroom, I commanded it. One afternoon about a year after we were married, I was working from home in my study. Xander was napping and the house was quiet. Mason came in holding a single envelope. His expression was unreadable. "This came for you," he said softly, placing it on my desk. "It's from a law firm in Milan." My blood ran cold. 1. The name on the return address meant nothing to me, but the city was a trigger. With slightly trembling fingers I opened it. It was a letter written in elegant, precise English. "Dear Mrs. Croft, you do not know me. My name is Sophia Rossi. I believe you may have once known of me a long time ago in another life. I am writing to you from my design studio in Florence. I am the head designer here. It is a small but respected house and I am proud of the work we do. I heard, through the gossips that still sometimes travel across the ocean, of your marriage. I also heard of what became of Julian and his mother. I will not pretend that news of their downfall did not bring me a certain sense of vindication. But mostly it brought me closure. I am writing to thank you. Thank you for the kindness you showed me all those years ago when you could have chosen cruelty. The path you set me on that day, though I did not understand it then, saved my life. It gave me a future he would have surely stolen from me. I wish you and your family every happiness. You deserve it. With gratitude, Sophia." I read the letter twice, tears welling in my eyes. They were not tears of sadness but of a deep, resonating peace. The last loose thread of my past had been tied off, not with bitterness but with grace. I handed the letter to Mason. He read it silently, then came around the desk and pulled me into a hug, kissing the top of my head. "You see," he murmured. "You built something good that day too. You saved a life." The final chapter of the Thorn saga came to me not through a letter, but through a newspaper clipping my father showed me with a grim sense of finality. It was from a cheap, sensationalist tabloid. The headline read, "Disgraced heir's sordid end confirmed." The article was brief and lurid. Julian Thorn's body had been identified in a mortuary in Bangkok. The official cause of death was a drug overdose, but the article heavily implied something more sinister, connected to a failed black market deal and debts owed to very dangerous people. There was a quote from a source, saying he had been sold through a chain of criminal enterprises after his theft in Myanmar, his body and his name used up until there was nothing left. The once golden boy had been reduced to a tawdry, cautionary tale in a gossip rag. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No pity. Just a hollow echo, the faint shadow of a nightmare that could no longer touch me. He was truly gone. The last ghost was laid to rest. Life moved on rich and full. We had another child, a daughter we named Clara, after the woman who had become my true mother in every way that mattered. My father doted on his grandchildren, a contented patriarch watching his legacy secure itself for another generation. One summer evening, we were all gathered in the garden for a barbecue. My father was teaching a 5-year-old Xander how to flip a burger, while little Clara, now 2, was chasing fireflies under Clara's watchful eye. Mason stood next to me at the grill, his arms slung casually around my shoulders. I looked around at the scene, the laughter, the love, the simple, profound normality of it all. This was the life I had fought for. This was the life I had died for. This was the life I had been given a second chance to build. Mason squeezed my shoulder, following my gaze. "A penny for your thoughts," he said softly. I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder. "I was just thinking," I said, my voice quiet. "I was thinking about how lucky I am. How we built all of this out of the ashes of something terrible." He turned his head and kissed my temple. "We didn't just build it out of the ashes, Chloe," he corrected me gently. "We built it in spite of them. You took that pain and you used it as a foundation for something stronger. Something real." He was right. The past had not been erased. It was a part of me, a layer of bedrock beneath the beautiful, thriving present. It was the reason I cherished the quiet moments, the reason I never took Mason's steady love for granted, the reason I fought so fiercely for my family's happiness and security. I had gone from a pawn in someone else's game to the architect of my own destiny. The journey had been brutal, the cost unimaginably high. But as I watched my son's serious face as he concentrated on his burger flipping lesson, heard my daughter's delighted shriek as she caught a flickering light in her hands, and felt the solid, unwavering presence of the man beside me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. It had been worth it. Every painful step, every heartbreak, every moment of terror. It had all led me here, to this peace, to this love, to this legacy. I was Isabella Croft. I was a survivor. I was a wife, a mother, a daughter, a CEO. And finally, after 2 lifetimes of struggle, I was truly, completely happy.